What if I told you that Carl Jung discovered a way to see through a person's mask using just 2 questions? And what if the person sitting across from you is hiding something so fundamental about themselves that even they can't see it? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at people the same way again. You probably think you know people, right? You believe you can read them, understand their motives, predict their behavior. But Carl Jung said something that shatters this illusion. According to Jung, the father of analytical psychology, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's what most people miss. Jung discovered that our true character isn't revealed in our achievements, our deeds, or even our failures. It shows itself in something much more subtle and much more telling. That's exactly what I'm about to show you. Carl Jung spent over 50 years studying the human psyche. What he found is both fascinating and unsettling. He realized that every person wears a persona, a mask we show to the world. But beneath this mask lies what Jung called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. And this is where things get interesting, so pay close attention. Jung discovered that as long as we're relaxed and in control, we can maintain this persona perfectly.
We can appear exactly as we want to be seen, but there are 2 very specific moments, 2 psychological triggers when this mask inevitably slips. And this is where Jung's 2 questions come in. According to him, these moments reveal more about a person's character than years of observation ever could. Why? Because they bypass conscious thinking and go straight to what Jung called unconscious complexes, the hidden forces that drive our behavior. But before I reveal these questions, you need to understand something crucial about human nature that Jung uncovered. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's the key to why these questions are so powerful. Jung realized that our personality has several layers: the persona, our public mask; the ego, our conscious self; the personal unconscious, our repressed experiences; the shadow, our rejected parts; and the collective unconscious, universal human patterns. Here's the fascinating part. When certain psychological triggers are activated, we bypass both persona and ego. We react from what Jung called our true self, the raw, unfiltered version of who we really are. And Jung identified 2 specific triggers that always work. The first trigger is about projection. Jung found that we unconsciously project our own shadow traits onto others. When we criticize someone, we're often revealing our own hidden qualities. The second trigger is what Jung called ego inflation. When our sense of self is threatened or excessively boosted, our true character emerges from behind the mask.
Now, you're probably wondering, what are these questions? Listen carefully, because how you ask them is just as important as the questions themselves. The first question is, what kind of person can you absolutely not stand? Here's where Jung's interpretation is crucial, because most people get this completely wrong. He discovered that what we most hate in others is actually a mirror of our own shadow, those parts of ourselves we've repressed and refused to acknowledge. He called this psychological projection, and it's one of the most reliable ways to recognize a person's true character. When someone answers this question, they're not really talking about others, they're giving you a map of their own psychological blind spots. Why should you pay attention to the specific words they use? According to Jung, the more heated someone becomes while describing what they hate in others, the more likely it is that they themselves possess those very traits. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, he said. For example, if someone says they hate dishonest people,
Jung would interpret this as a sign that the person struggles with their own relationship to the truth, perhaps lying to themselves or hiding episodes of deceit. If someone says they hate selfish people, it often points to someone who has repressed their own needs so strongly that they can't stand it when others express what they themselves deny. If someone says they hate weak people, Jung found it's usually someone deeply afraid of their own vulnerability, who's built their identity around appearing strong. But here's the crucial point. The shadow doesn't only contain negative traits, but any qualities we've learned to reject in ourselves. Sometimes people say they hate show-offs or people who are too happy. Jung discovered this often reveals someone who has suppressed their own joy or self-confidence. Now, the second question is even more revealing because it catches people when their guard is completely down. The second question is, tell me about a situation where you were absolutely certain you were right, and then it turned out you were wrong. Here's where Jung's genius truly shines, because this question reveals something most people never see about themselves. He discovered that the way someone deals with being wrong reveals their true character far more than how they deal with being right. Why? Because it threatens what Jung called the ego ideal, our image of ourselves as competent and knowledgeable. When this ego ideal is threatened, several unconscious defense mechanisms are activated. Denial, I wasn't really wrong, circumstances just changed. Rationalization, my mistake was actually reasonable. Projection, someone else misled me. Or trivialization, it wasn't important anyway. But here's Jung's astonishing discovery. People with the strongest character don't use these defense mechanisms at all. Instead, they do what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. They can admit they were wrong without their entire self-image collapsing. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, Jung said. The people who can honestly look at their mistakes are the ones who actively become their authentic selves. Pay close attention to certain answers because they reveal decisive character traits. If someone can't name an example, Jung would say this person lives in such deep denial that they've built an elaborate fantasy of their own infallibility. He called this psychological inflation, when the ego becomes so rigid it can't endure any imperfection. If someone immediately blames external factors, it points to someone with an external locus of control. They believe life happens to them, not through them, and rarely take real responsibility. If someone becomes defensive, it reveals a person whose self-esteem is built on being right. Their identity is so fragile that admitting a mistake feels like psychological death. But if someone learns from their mistake, Jung saw this as psychological maturity, what he called integration, the ability to accept both the positive and negative aspects of oneself. Here's the most important thing Jung found about this question. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. These two questions work because they force people to look inward, even when they think they're talking about external things. The first question reveals shadow projections. The second uncovers our relationship to our own fallibility. Jung discovered something even deeper. People fall into predictable patterns depending on how they answer these questions. The inflated ego type projects all negative qualities onto others and can't admit mistakes. These individuals are actually the most insecure, building elaborate defenses against their own shadow. The self-deprecating type claims to hate traits they possess and confesses mistakes excessively. This too is a defense, superficially acknowledging errors to avoid truly engaging with them. The integrated type, rare individuals, can recognize both their projections and their mistakes without their self-image collapsing. Jung called this psychological integration, the hallmark of mental health. Here's where Jung's intuition becomes almost priceless. He discovered that once you understand a person's pattern, You can predict their behavior with astonishing precision. Why? Because people are far more consistent than they appear. They simply express their core pattern in different forms depending on the situation.
But there's something even more important. If you're still listening, you need to hear this. Jung spent decades studying what he called the dark side of human nature, and he discovered specific warning signs that appear when you ask these questions. Red flag number 1. They project all negative traits onto certain groups. Jung observed that mentally healthy people recognize negative traits in all kinds of people. But if someone constantly projects only onto a single group, a political party, a gender, a race, a profession, this indicates a dangerous psychological split. Red flag number 2. They've never been wrong about anything important. According to Jung, this level of denial shows psychological inflation, a dangerous detachment from reality that often precedes major life crises. Red flag number 3. Their energy changes completely when they talk about what they hate. Jung observed that sudden shifts in energy indicate a major shadow complex has been struck. The more dramatic the change, the more repressed material has been uncovered. Red flag number 4. They immediately turn the questions aggressively around. Jung noted that people who reject or deflect these questions at once are often hiding the most important shadow material. But here's perhaps Jung's most important insight. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are transformed. If this information has triggered a kind of reaction in you, share this knowledge with someone who might need it. Your simple action could be the catalyst for their transformation.
Jung discovered that these questions not only reveal character, they actually change people. Why? Because the act of honest self-reflection is what Jung called the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self. That's why you must be careful how you use this knowledge. When you recognize someone's shadow material, you have a choice. You can use it to manipulate them, or you can use it to understand them more deeply. Jung found that manipulation produces what he called psychological poison. It corrupts both the manipulator and the manipulated. But when you use these insights for genuine understanding, something remarkable happens. Relationships become more authentic, more honest, more real. Now comes the part that will change your view of yourself. These questions work in both directions. When you ask them to others, you're forced to face your own answers as well. When you judge the projections of others, you reveal your own. When you analyze how someone deals with being wrong, you confront your own relationship with fallibility. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. This isn't just a nice phrase, it's the key to psychological growth. Jung discovered something even deeper about human nature. Once you understand these psychological patterns, you can apply them in all areas of life. In relationships, you can look beyond the persona your partner presents and understand their deeper psychological patterns, leading to more authentic intimacy. In business, you can recognize people's deeper motivations and blind spots. Most business conflicts, Jung found, arise from unacknowledged shadow projections. In parenting, you can help your children develop self-awareness by modeling honest self-reflection. Children who learn early to recognize their shadow develop stronger psychological health. In leadership, you can create environments where people feel safe to be authentic. Authentic leadership, Jung said, requires first acknowledging your own shadow. But here's the most important thing Jung discovered. The most frightening thing is to fully accept yourself. People who become skilled at reading others often use this ability to avoid looking at themselves. They become psychological voyeurs, dissecting everyone else while remaining blind to their own patterns. According to Jung, this is the greatest danger of psychological knowledge. It can become just another defense mechanism, another way to avoid authentic confrontation with oneself. Your task is not to seek love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. The same applies to self-knowledge. Your task is not to analyze others, but to recognize the barriers you've built against truly knowing yourself. Here's my challenge for you. Jung spent decades exploring the darkest corners of the human psyche. What he found there was not always pleasant or neat. Instead, he found something much deeper and more disturbing. Every person we encounter is a mirror, reflecting aspects of ourselves we'd rather not acknowledge. Yet he understood something crucial. Before we can truly understand others, before we can decipher their motivation, predict their behavior, or help them grow, we must first turn that sharp gaze inward. We must be willing to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves that we avoid for most of our lives. That's why Jung insisted that before we apply his deepest psychological insights to others, we must first answer two deceptively simple questions for ourselves. The first mirror: what you cannot bear. What kind of person can you absolutely not stand? Think about it. Who instantly triggers that instinctive reaction of dislike or irritation? Is it the arrogant know-it-all, the passive-aggressive colleague, the eternal victim, the ruthlessly ambitious? Whichever type you chose, Jung would tell you you've just revealed something fundamental about your own shadow. Those aspects of your personality you've rejected, suppressed, or refused to acknowledge. Jung's concept of the shadow isn't about being evil or malicious, it's about being whole. Every person carries within them the full spectrum of human potential. Kindness and cruelty, wisdom and foolishness, strength and weakness, altruism and selfishness. But as we develop our conscious self, we inevitably reject certain qualities and push them into the unconscious. The people who irritate us most aren't random. They carry traits that also exist in us, but which we've denied. It's not about blame or judgment, it's about recognition. Our strongest reactions to others rarely have much to do with them. They have to do with us. When we harshly judge someone, we often see a denied part of ourselves reflected. This recognition triggers an unconscious panic that we experience as irritation, anger, or disgust. The shadow is not our enemy, it's our teacher. It contains not only our repressed negative traits, but also positive qualities we've denied because they didn't fit our self-image or weren't accepted in our environment. The person whose self-confidence makes you jealous may be showing you your own unexpressed potential. The person whose emotional expressiveness annoys you may reflect your own buried capacity for feeling.
The second mirror: your relationship to fallibility. Recall a time when you were absolutely certain you were right and then were proven wrong. This question goes even deeper. It asks us to examine not just what we dislike in others, but how we deal with one of the most difficult aspects of being human, our fallibility. How do you react when you discover you are wrong? Do you deflect and justify, attack the person or information that challenged you, retreat into shame and self-criticism, double down, insisting you're right despite evidence? Or do you pause, reflect, and honestly ask what this moment might teach you? Jung understood. Our relationship to being wrong reveals everything about our psychological maturity. The person who can't stand being wrong is trapped in a self-built prison, endlessly defending a false self that must maintain the illusion of perfection.
The person who collapses in shame is also trapped, unable to separate their worth from their accuracy. But the person who can sit with a mistake, examine it with curiosity, taps into something profound. The humility Jung considered essential for genuine growth. Such a person recognizes that certainty is often an illusion, that our perspectives are limited, and that being wrong is not a catastrophe, but information. If you can honestly reflect on a moment when you were wrong, you begin to see which psychological mechanisms created that certainty in the first place. You see how your ego constructs stories to protect itself, how your mind selects evidence to support what you want to believe, how your emotional investments in being right blind you to obvious truths. Jung's intuition was not just academic. He discovered that only when we have honestly confronted our own shadow can we help others confront theirs. Only when we've faced our own relationship to error can we understand what others reveal when they answer these questions. Because psychological projection works both ways. If you haven't examined your own shadow, you see shadows everywhere except where they really are. If you haven't dealt with your own fallibility, you misunderstand how others handle being wrong. The person who has done this inner work develops what Jung called psychological sharpness, the ability to see beneath superficial behavior to the underlying dynamics. To recognize when someone's anger is really fear, when arrogance is really insecurity, when rigidity is really panic in the face of chaos. More importantly, such a person develops compassion. Once you've seen your own capacity for self-deception, rationalization, and defending the indefensible, you stop being surprised or judgmental when others do the same. You no longer see these behaviors as character flaws, but as universal human strategies for coping with psychological pain. Jung's ultimate insight wasn't about becoming an expert in reading others. It was about becoming an expert in reading yourself. Because when you truly understand your own inner life, when you've mapped your shadow and made peace with your fallibility, something remarkable happens. Others stop being mysterious. You begin to see that the colleague who frustrates you struggles with the same inner conflicts you do, only expressing them differently. That the family member who drives you crazy is defending against the same fundamental fears you also carry. That the stranger whose behavior seems incomprehensible is simply using different strategies to meet the same basic human needs as you. This realization doesn't excuse harmful behavior, nor does it remove the need for boundaries, but it transforms your relationship to others from one filled with judgment and frustration to one filled with understanding and ultimately compassion. As Jung himself said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. The question isn't whether these insights will change your view of people. They will. The real question is whether you're brave enough to let them also change your view of yourself. Because, as Jung discovered in decades of work with the human psyche, that's where true transformation begins. In the uncomfortable, necessary, and liberating work of getting to know yourself completely, shadows and all. Thank you for staying with this exploration until the end. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with someone who might benefit from it.